Lopez, and I'm a fairly new member of YAF. I first heard about the organization after the Ben Shapiro incident here on campus, when Ben was invited to speak, but was met with near chaos. Hundreds of students blocked the doorway to where the speaker was scheduled to appear, chanting things like "no justice, no peace," "racists go home," and "no violence," all while ironically physically blocking people from passing them, and in some cases, pushing those who made an attempt to enter. It was not only CSULA students who were stopped from attending, but even those who had driven from as far as Santa Barbara. All because students who had barricaded the door were afraid and upset of an opinion that differed from theirs. After the ordeal, who did the school administration put the blame on? Not those who were obstructing the walkway or pushing back students. No, instead the blame was placed on YAF and Shapiro, while those students were coddled. Now, I'm not exactly what you would call a conservative, not by any means. But I was tired of only hearing one side of the students to barricade doors and rip down posters. But if they just took the time to listen, whether they agreed or not, they would find out that these bigots and homophobes are nothing like the way that the mainstream media paints them. So to those who are tearing down posters and blocking doorways, I just want to say, I know and understand that opinions can be scary, but they will not hurt you. And to those who are looking to get more than one opinion on campus, I would say join YAF. And now to introduce tonight's speaker, please give a warm welcome to this chapter's founding chairman, Mark Kahanding.
Good afternoon, everybody. How are we all doing today? Good? Give me 1 second, technical difficulties. Bryce?
That's all cool. There we go.
All right, let's get to it. Christina Hoff Sommers, better known as the factual feminist, and better known as Based Mom, is a resident scholar at the American Enterprise Institute. Before joining AIE, she was a professor of philosophy at Clark University. Her articles have appeared in publications such as the Journal of Philosophy, the New York Times, the Atlantic. Professor Sommers is the editor of Vice and Virtue in Everyday Life, a leading college ethics text, and the author of several books, including Who Stole Feminism and The War Against Boys. Sommers has lectured and taken part in many debates in every major college and university across the country. She hosts the popular YouTube video blog, The Factual Feminist, and she has more than 120,000 Twitter followers, and you all can follow her at CHS Sommers. Without further ado, everyone please help me welcome the Factual Feminist.
Thank you. The Factual Feminist reporting to duty. I'm very happy to be here. Let me get myself organized without... Okay. Well, thank you for that kind introduction, Mark. And thanks to the Young Americas Foundation for sponsoring my talk at Cal State LA. The last time a speaker was here, as you heard, representing the Young Americas Foundation, there were near riots. There were riots. I think the speaker was temporarily taken hostage. Maybe the audience was taken hostage. So I want to extend a warm thanks to CSULA protesters for not imprisoning anybody, at least not yet. By the power vested in me as the Factual Feminist, I declare this lecture hall a safe space. Safe for reason, for argument, for common sense, debate, disagreement, safe for free expression. And instead of checking your privilege, we are going to check a few facts. Now, something has gone badly wrong with feminism. seriously wrong. It appears to have taken a turn towards authoritarianism and anger. Today's young feminists are not just angry at the world, they're even angry with one another. A Latino feminist working on her master's degree in religious studies at Yale University wrote a piece in Huffington Post recently in which she was calling out Women's History Month. She faulted it for celebrating the 19th century suffragists, whom she said marginalized women of color. Quote, "I want a feminism and a women's history that puts women of color at the center." Now here is a picture of a photo which apparently she chose to accompany. Wait a minute, how do I go down? Bottom right. A mom with
There we go.
PowerPoints.
All right. Oh, I see what the problem is. So we can just scroll down like this.
Oh, scroll, okay.
There you go.
All right, there's her picture. This is the graduate student. Now, I am not going to dwell on this particular young woman. I'll go back to a friendlier slide. No, now it's not doing it.
Just use 2 fingers.
Okay. Okay, I got it. I'm not going to dwell on her because she perfectly embodies a new style of feminism that I have encountered on many campuses, and that is in fact sweeping the American campus. I last year spoke at UMass Amherst, and earlier at Oberlin College, Georgetown University. At UMass, a young woman throughout my talk was screaming, "F you, F you." At Oberlin and Georgetown, they organized safe spaces where students could flee from what they called my violence. And during my lecture, 30 women and a therapy dog fled to a safe room. And I'm sorry that I triggered that dog, but I have a picture of him. Now, at all campuses that I visited, the rooms were decked out with posters and messages like, "Free speech doesn't mean hate speech," and "Christina Hoff Sommers, go home and take your internalized misogyny with you." At Oberlin and Georgetown, administrators provided me with police escorts. In fact, I had escorts here today at your school. Apparently, I now require escorts. I have been lecturing on college campuses for almost 30 years. And I have views that are controversial among feminists. I am a feminist, but my views are controversial within women's studies. And typically I would go to campus, women's studies students or gender activists would come, we would debate, we would disagree, and then often we'd go out for drinks, and sometimes we'd part as friends. Well, this did not happen at Oberlin or Georgetown. We did not go out for drinks. There was just fury at the idea that a dissident thinker was among them, someone who was skeptical about some of their most cherished views. So, stipulate the police never played any part, had no role in my visits to campus. It's just so strange that this has happened, and it's only happened within the last few years. So in the time I have with you, I'm going to explain what forces have created today's safe space, check your privilege, grievance-oriented feminism. I'm going to suggest a few things you might do to set it right. I'll speak for 30 or so minutes and then entertain questions, rebuttals, denunciations. No need to hold back. I'm not easily triggered. Although I admit I am a little shaken by that charge of internalized misogyny. I mean, what does it really mean? Is there such a thing as external misogyny? Externalized? I mean, and if it's internalized, how could I not take it home with me? I just don't understand it. But anyway, leaving that, I will say that to start, I'm going to say a few words about my identity. I am a white, Jewish, cisgendered, heteronormative, age-enhanced, middle-class female, Los Angeles born and bred, with a little dog named Izzy. And I was going to bring Izzy along for protection, but I didn't want her to get hauled off to some safe space. All right, on to our topic. What the hell is going on with feminism? To understand how and why things have gone wrong, it's important to understand feminism when it goes right. I am a strong supporter of what I call equity feminism, and I hope all of you are too. Equity feminism stands for the moral, social, legal equality of the sexes and the freedom of men and women to employ their equal status to pursue happiness as they choose. Equity feminism is not at war with masculinity or femininity. It doesn't view most men and women as opposing tribes, theories of universal patriarchal oppression or inherent evils of capitalism. These aren't part of its founding documents. There aren't even partisan litmus tests. It welcomes men and women of goodwill from across the political spectrum. Put simply, equity feminism affirms for women what it affirms for everyone: fair treatment, dignity, opportunity, personal liberty. By any measure, equity feminism is a great American success story. It's not new. It's rooted in the classical liberal political tradition that developed out of the European Enlightenment. This is the tradition that led Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson, coming from the European Enlightenment, he asserted in the Declaration of Independence the universal right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The right to pursue happiness. Just think about what that means. The British journalist Andrew Sullivan once pointed out how shocking that must have sounded in 1776. Most of the world was mired in theocracy, monarchy, dictatorship, and Sullivan imagined Puritans, monarchists, and autocrats across the globe thinking, the pursuit of what? Where? By whom? Who authorized this? By whose permission? Are you off on some crazy venture of your own? V.S. Naipaul, the Nobel Prize-winning novelist and essayist, he says that this Jeffersonian Declaration of Happiness, he said that it's so revolutionary and world-changing. He calls it an immense human idea, an elastic idea that encompasses everyone. These are his words, Naipaul's words. So much is contained in it. The idea of individual responsibility, choice, the life of the intellect. It can't be reduced to a fixed system. It cannot generate fanaticism, but it's known to exist, and because of that, other more rigid systems in the end blow away. Now, the 19th century suffragist Elizabeth Cady Stanton, she made this explicitly clear when she deployed the Jefferson's enormous idea, immense idea, in her effort to blow away a system that denied women full citizenship. So on July 20th, 1828, in a little gathering of men and women, they came together in Seneca Falls, New York, for the first American Women's Rights Conference. And this convention adopted something called the Declaration of Sentiments, written by Stanton. And it includes these words: we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equal, endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, and among them life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, this Declaration of Happiness, it doesn't guarantee happiness. It doesn't specify what it is that will make you happy, but it promises you the freedom to forge your own destiny. In the words of one celebrated feminist, it promises men and women the right to live not at the mercy of the world, but as a builder and designer of that world. Now, it was equity feminism that informed the first wave of feminism that brought women the vote. It was equity feminism that brought women many other rights. In the second wave, further enhanced women's freedoms and opportunities in education, in the workplace. And as I said, it's a stunning success story. Just look around. American women are now among the freest and most self-determining in human history, and we're flourishing in unprecedented ways. In education, women are now earn a majority of associate, bachelor, master's, and doctoral degrees. And this margin, this advantage grows every year. This is not good news for men, but it certainly is testimony to progress of women. At this university, it's something like 63% female. So just the idea that you would have that, there would still be feminists complaining of structural inequities when you see this amazing success. I'm not saying there aren't problems for women, there are problems for men too. But overall, when I say it was a success story, recent government data, Department of Education data, show that Hispanic and Native American women are now more likely to attend college than white males. African American women are on a par with white males. Asian women are ahead of everyone. In the workforce, if you look at the so-called wage gap, even feminist economists, not all of them, but some, agree that when you do the proper controls, when you consider length of time in the workplace, you know, how many hours people work per week, you do the proper, you consider all the variables, the wage gap almost disappears. And women are now elected chief executives of major corporations, heads of government, of leading nations with little fuss or commentary about the fact that they are women. Now again, I want to make this clear that I'm not saying there's no room for progress. Of course there is. Things aren't perfect for women or for men. But our foremothers and forefathers left us a system that allows for peaceful expression. They allow for, arguing with others, for change. If you don't like something, then you just have to convince the rest of us that you're right, and it will change. It's called democracy. But you may have noticed campus feminists are not celebrating democratic freedom or the right to pursue happiness. They don't seem to be celebrating much of anything. They're very angry, they're aggrieved, and one thing that makes them especially furious is equity feminism. In feminist theory classes, feminist theory textbooks, typically, not all, I'm sure there are some exceptions, I haven't found them, but I'm happy if you've heard of one. In feminist theory classes, they present equity feminism, they call it liberal feminism, and they present it as a relic of the past. And they say it was a creation of 19th century middle-class women to advance their class privileges under capitalism. And that's why that Latino graduate student made an insulting hand gesture to women's history. She was making a hand gesture to equity feminism. Equity feminism is faulted in feminist theory classes, gender studies classes for this. It's faulted for all it's doing, they say, is trying to put certain women on a par with men. It doesn't challenge underlying structures of the Western patriarchal capitalist system. Bell Hooks, for example, she's a gender theorist who inspires today's check your privilege feminists. And she, in one of her books, she offers the example of Sandra Day O'Connor as an example of the failure of equity feminism. Now, Justice O'Connor was the first woman ever appointed to the United States Supreme Court. And as an equity feminist, I see that as a step forward, a big step forward. Professor Hooks does not. Quote, women like O'Connor, she says, will exercise power alongside men even as they continue to support white supremacy, capitalism, and patriarchy. Now, Professor Hooks is an intersectional feminist, and I'm going to explain what that means in a moment for those who don't know. And today's gender studies texts and feminist theory courses, they present intersectional feminism as the most advanced, up-to-date school of thought. Equity feminism is the past, intersectional feminism is the future. Now, unlike equity feminists, feminism. Intersectional feminism did not develop from its intellectual roots are not in the European Enlightenment or the Declaration of Independence. It grew out of the radical politics of the 1960s, and it's informed by the philosophy of Karl Marx and his modern-day heirs like Paulo Freire, Franz Fanon, Michel Foucault. Now, this tradition views American ideals of free expression, due process, the right to pursue happiness. They view them, they say they're used as ploys by oppressors to keep others down. And they view equity feminism as in the same light. Now, I think it's fair to say that most Americans, including probably everyone in this room, sees our nation as flawed, deeply flawed in many ways, but nevertheless, probably the most successful and diverse democracy the world has ever seen. Intersectionality sees something different. By its lights, racism, sexism, classism, ableism, ageism, lookism, and the LGBTQT phobias, these aren't only rampant, but interconnected, overlapping, mutually reinforcing. For example, Patricia Collins, a former president of the American Sociological Association, one of the chief architects of intersectionality theory, she co-authored a textbook that describes the United States not as a land of the free, but as a, quote, matrix of oppression. So beneath this veneer of freedom and opportunity, she says, there's a rigid system of privilege and domination. Now, Collins and her co-author, they alert students to the true and hidden nature of their society. This is in the textbook from Patricia Collins, her co-author. Dominant forms of knowledge have been constructed largely from the experiences of the most powerful. Now, they promise to bring students in touch with deeper, subordinated truths, is the phrase, by avoiding what they call Western and masculine concepts such as logic and reason. Now, listen closely to what I'm about to say, because it may be the key to the new fanaticism on campus. According to intersectional theory, subjugated groups, women, people of color, disabled, they have access to other and better ways of thinking and knowing than their oppressors. They have access to deeper, more authentic, liberating knowledge about human reality. So they say. But these different knowers, as they call them, they can only discover and share this secret knowledge they have, but liberating knowledge. They can only discover it and share it if they can share stories about their lived experience and feel protected in a safe space. And Patricia Collins uses this as a space where people can freely say what they know. And to provide this safety, and especially at a complex institution like a university, to provide this safety, members of privileged groups, especially white, able-bodied, cisgendered men, they should just keep quiet and listen. If they try to apply reason and logic to the positions of the marginalized, intersectionally oppressed people, they will be told to stop mansplaining and check their privilege without any regard to the merits of what they have to say. So the debate is kind of rigged from the start. Well, as it happens, I, an age-enhanced person and a woman, would seem to have access to privileged knowledge by this definition. And in fact, nearly all the Young Americas Foundation members who invited me today are persons of color. Don't we have special access to profound human truths? And do people have to listen to us? Well, it turns out that only certain members of marginalized groups deserve a hearing, those who already agree with the theory. Now, I first saw this theory put in practice a long time ago in 1992 at the annual meetings of the National Women's Studies Association in Austin, Texas. Now, the conference organizers had imbibed the lessons of intersectionality, and they were very determined to honor all identities. Now, the problem was there weren't any men there, so there was a mad scramble to determine which members were oppressors and which were oppressed. Participants were told to assemble in small groups based on their grievances and healing needs. So there were groups for Asian women, African American women, old women, Jewish women, lesbian women, disabled women, fat women. None of these groups proved stable. The fat group started arguing with one another and polarized into a gay and straight faction. Members of the black lesbian group couldn't get along. Some of them had white partners. They were called out for their privilege and had to form a separate group. And new identities emerged. A group of women with allergies. They had a set of demands. We're not supposed to wear dry clean clothing or hairspray at any more conferences. It was a conference of scholars, but it seemed more like a cult. It didn't produce knowledge or enlightenment. It was a maelstrom of pointless bitterness. Now, by training, I'm a philosopher. And that means that I'm a stickler for reason, logic, dispassionate evaluation of evidence, and as such, I am troubled by intersectional theory. Now, if this theory were simply a recommendation for social scientists and activists to consider diversity of perspectives, to consider the point of view of marginalized people, that would be well and good. That would just be good social science. I have no quarrel with that. I am concerned about intersectional feminism, how it is taught and practiced on the college campus. Now, here is a favorite slogan of intersectional feminism. Someone wrote an essay with this title, and it went viral, and they have T-shirts, and people find it inspiring. My response to intersectionality comes from a different slogan, aphorism, this one from an Italian blogger. I don't dare quote it. I will, because some people are just listening. The amount of energy necessary to refute bullshit, that's hard for based mom, is an order of, the amount of energy necessary to refute bullshit is an order of magnitude bigger than to produce it. So bear with me. Now, I can imagine someone saying, wait a minute. You fault intersectional feminists and you say they're too negative and harshly critical of equity feminism, but you turn around and you're just as harsh and negative and critical of them. There's nothing wrong with being harshly critical if you can back it up. And I believe that I can. Let's look at intersectional feminism. Their claim that liberal feminism, what I call equity feminism, that it was classist, racist, and tailored to the needs and aspirations of white bourgeois women. And think of that Yale graduate student giving this hand gesture to so-called white feminism. The feminist foremothers of the first wave, despite their personal limitations, and they did have them, they were promoting universal human ideals, the right to vote, to be educated, to intermarriage as equals, to flourish. These are not the special province of white women, middle-class women, American women, even Western women. As V.S. Naipaul said, the right to pursue happiness is elastic. It encompasses everyone, and everywhere men and women are claiming it. I have been to international women's conferences where I meet feminist leaders from Burma, Iran, Cambodia, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, courageous women who are fighting today, often at great risk, for the rights pioneered by Western liberal feminist foremothers. I'll never forget a young woman named Zin Mar Ong. She was a 36-year-old activist from Burma. She had spent 11 years in solitary confinement in a Burmese jail for the crime of passing out pro-women's rights and pro-democracy leaflets. She told us that she survived her confinement by reciting a poem over and over again. Someone can imprison your body but not your mind. Someone can imprison your body but not your mind. Now, what did she do the moment she was freed from prison? She started protesting again. one of the bravest women. She immediately began protesting, and then she said this to a conference of women in New York, "We try to deliver the message. Democracy is not only for the West, but for all human beings. There are women's groups across the globe whose members are risking their lives for basic freedoms we take for granted. It pains me to see gender studies textbooks and U.S. universities and gifted writers like Bell Hooks blithely dismiss the Western democratic tradition and equity feminism. Intersectionality, the intersectional feminists pretend they have something better to offer. They don't." There is a famous quote falsely attributed to Winston Churchill, but never mind who said it, it's true and worth quoting. "Democracy is the worst form of government except for all the rest." I would add that equity feminism is the worst form of feminism except for all the rest. Now, am I saying that intersectional theory is worthless through and through? That there's absolutely no truth? No, I'm not. I learn from these texts, but overall, whatever truths they're conveying is just buried in this rhetoric about the patriarchy. There is no patriarchy in the United States. That's absurd. And whatever is reasonable and good in this theory, it can be absorbed by equity feminism. But equity feminism cannot and should not absorb many features of this new intersectional movement, which is so powerful now on campus. Just look at your own gender studies department. You may be an example, you may be an exception, but they now are all saying that, we're going to look at all of these different forms of oppression. All the emphasis is on oppression, not liberation, not liberal traditions that freed human beings across the world. Intersectional feminism professes to be humane and progressive, but it promotes bullying. It tells us that white males need to check their privilege because they're in charge of the capitalist white supremacist patriarchy, and they enjoy most of the unearned privileges. Well, on many campuses, that has given members of victim groups license to treat them with contempt. Members of the insider victim class now routinely do to others what they accuse the privileged class of doing to them. They stereotype, condescend, demonize, silence people, censor people, tear down their posters. Intersectional feminism twists facts. Like other authoritarian systems, intersectionality uses propaganda and false statistics to prove how right it is and important it is. Female students, women students at places like centers of privilege, Yale, Swarthmore, Stanford, Claremont, they have been persuaded they are oppressed. And they can cite a litany of victim statistics from their gender studies classes that prove their plight in the American patriarchy. Someone needs to tell them that most of those statistics are bogus. The threat of harm is a human constant, but today's college women are among the most liberated and privileged and safe people on earth. Intersectional feminism is a repressive ideology. It infantilizes women. Trigger warnings, microaggression monitoring, privilege checking. These are not really about protecting vulnerable, marginalized people. They're illiberal means of preventing the free exchange of ideas. So when Brown University had a debate over the accuracy of some sexual assault statistics. And they had two people, one thought they were accurate and believed that there was a campus rape culture, the other was a skeptic. Brown University hosted this debate, but there were so many outraged students that they, with the full approval of the college president, Christina Paxton, they formed a safe room for the distraught students. And this was explained in the New York Times. The safe room came equipped with cookies, coloring books, bubbles, Play-Doh, calming music, pillows, blankets, and a video of frolicking puppies. Oh, well, go back to my puppy now. Is this what feminism has come to? What's going on? I mean, I have been a feminist since the 1970s. But my feminism insists that women are equal to men, just as intelligent, rational, mentally strong, just as much self-command. We're not fragile little birds. We don't need Plato. We can handle grown-up debates, even painful and difficult subjects. That's the only way that we're going to mature as thinkers and empathetic human beings. In the end, this new style of grievance feminism, a matrix of oppression feminism, at its core is this paradox, this contradiction. It fights racism and sexism by classifying everybody according to their race and sex. I think if you're going to fight racism and sexism, you shouldn't practice it. Rule number one. It encourages a victim Olympics, and it is unfalsifiable. It's actually a classic conspiracy theory, because if you criticize it, that just proves that they're right and you're wrong, and that you're part of the problem they're seeking to address. There's no way to criticize it without falling into from their point of view, without showing your bad faith. Now, some are going to claim that intersectional feminism and this new, privilege approach, check your privilege approach, is still largely valid, and it's just been misapplied by students at Yale and Brown and Oberlin and UMass and those allergic women at the Austin Women's Studies Conference. I respectfully disagree. It pretends to be a grand theory about social justice. In practice, it is a formula for the pursuit of unhappiness. We can do better. So my advice to today's college students, fight for what is rightfully yours. The freedom to speak, to think, to grow. Take back freedom. Take back reason. Take back kindness and humor. And while you're at it, take back feminism. Thank you.
All right, we're going to allow time for questions. So you can raise your hand if you have one, and we'll come to you.
Come down to the aisles and we'll be holding the mic.
You can come down to that.
So, come down. Up,
Hold the button.
Hello?
Hello.
All right.
Hi. So recently in the West, we've seen a lot of legislation that targets so-called hate crimes, where these are things like saying mean things, for example, on the internet or whatever. Would you describe this as a sort of outgrowth of like a feminine virtue, but too much of it, like an excess of a feminine virtue, or no?
It's interesting you say that, because I have heard people call the universities are becoming a pink police state, in that it's sort of all tailored, not allegedly to the sensibility of women. I would say tailored, because as a woman I don't identify with all these calls for censorship and hyperprotectiveness. I think what's happened is there's a very vocal group of hypersensitive women, and somehow their sensibilities have been weaponized through largely the cooperation of the university administrators, and is where the internet's concerned. Lots of groups are going, companies are going along with it. So I think that this is the fallout of basically a group of feminists who do believe in this theory that we're all, massively suffering from this, we're in a crisis. There's an epidemic of misery among women, and so they want to take extreme measures. And so they're justifying censorship. On some campuses, they're justifying dropping due process in cases where someone's accused of sexual assault, and insisting that professors tailor their readings to their phobias. So this is, yes, to answer your question, I do think it is probably being promoted by women, but only a very small percentage of hypersensitive intersectional feminists.
Hello. I'm so- I had one question, and I want to get your opinion on women being drafted.
Right. Well, it's very interesting. One of the things I point out in my books and in The Factual Feminist is that the women's groups, when they're critical of men, which they quite often are, they will often point to areas where men are overrepresented in, CEOs of Fortune 500s or senators in the United States Senate. So, well, that's not very many people. That's, a small number compared to the sacrifices that so many men have to make in being drafted or serving in the armed services. Not to mention, it's true that men in all societies tend to be overrepresented at the very peak of success. They're also overrepresented at the nadir of failure. You find in almost every society, well, I will say every society in the anthropological record, you will find that just more men succeeding spectacularly and failing spectacularly. The feminists tend to only look at the success and ignore the areas where men have to struggle, and they want equality, in engineering departments, and even asking, well, let's use Title IX to force that along. But I don't see this move for equality in the armed forces. And you do find some feminists, but there's certainly been no uprising in demanding equality, and we want an equality in even in combat. They don't do that. Now, even in the armed services, women who already are in the armed services, only about 7% want to be in combat. So women aren't asking to be in combat, and something we're very grateful for is that men do that. And most women do not wish to do it. I certainly wouldn't wish to do it. Maybe a sharpshooter. So there's some pretty great women sharpshooters, but just ordinary combat, you have some women who do. Now, I am in favor of allowing them to do it as long as they don't lower the standards. And as long as it doesn't, just create, you have to just evaluate. But overall, we are a democracy, and women who want to be warriors can be awesome. So I'm in favor of it, but I do think it's a failure of the women's movement that they neglected to demand equality there. Yes.
Hi, I've really enjoyed following your work, so it's great to finally meet you.
Thank you.
I think you've often said that you believe feminism's next great work lies abroad, and I was wondering what you thought might be some practical methods for beginning that work, something we could do that would be more productive than just complaining like a lot of people are doing these days.
I'm so glad you asked that, because this is one thing that hurts me the most when I go to Oberlin and see these kids, Georgetown. These kids are smart.